Hello, everyone. If you're on the East Coast with me, good morning. If you're in Europe with Leanne, it's good afternoon, right? It's pretty deep into your day.
It is,
So,
yeah. Good afternoon or
and if
morning,
and if
wherever
you
you are.
and if you're on the West Coast, you must be up really, really early if you're catching us live. So thank you for joining us. If you are here, this is your show. This is interactive for you. So please jump in the comments, say hello, let us know that you are with us, and make sure that you're giving us your questions and your comments because we love having your interaction with us during the show. Leanne is one of my favorite podcasters. I was so um, happy when I was invited to be a part of her show. And so when I got the chance to return the favor and invite her to this show, it felt like a full circle moment. So Leanne, tell everybody who you are.
My name is Leanne Elliott. I'm a chartered occupational psychologist, which it goes by various names. I think stateside you might know it better as an organizational psychologist, a business psychologist, all much the same. I work primarily with owner-led businesses to help them build the structures and systems needed to create awesome workplace cultures. As part of that, we launched Truth, Lies, and Work podcast to bring these really best practices to businesses that aren't yet mature enough or big enough to have this internal capability. So, how can we support business owners with all things people and culture? And what started off as a little show as part of our marketing stream is now one of the main things we do. We're part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. We have been for the last 3 years. And yeah, I love it because I get to meet awesome people like you, Rita.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. So Leanne would love to connect with you on LinkedIn. Meet Leanne. And then her show also has a page, which is Truth Lies Work on LinkedIn. So two places to connect with her. Look, her podcast is so good. And she's talking about really what's relevant, what is happening in the world today, with some amazing guests. I'm not saying that just because I got to be one. So, but I mean, it really you're gonna love that show. Leslie, thanks for joining us from North Carolina. It's just over sunrise is just happening here. Probably the same for you. And many of you might be on your morning commute. So thanks for joining us. Leanne, you're going to share with us a story, a lesson that so many of us learn. And let me tell you, listeners, right now, if you have young people in your life, you need to gift them this episode. Just trust me right now. I'm telling you, you're going to need to gift them this episode. But as fellow psychologists, we're really going to get into the psychology of why we struggle to ask for help. But set us up, Leanne. Start us in the beginning of the story of what was happening for you at work.
I got promoted into my first management role when I was 27, which looking back seems really, really young. But at the time, I felt ready. I felt capable. I think, like most young people, there's a beautiful mix of confidence and ignorance that just works together really well to make sure you put yourself out there for these opportunities. So I was given the opportunity to run a welfare to work contract in the UK from startup. So there was no team, no premises, no nothing. Day one, it was just me and one member of staff. So I built up a team, thought I was doing all right because I was confident in that bit, Rita. I'd done my undergrad in organizational psychology. I knew how to recruit people. I knew how to train people. I knew how to onboard people. That bit I was fine with. But in terms of the operation side, in terms of essentially building a mini business, I was completely out of my depth. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was very conscious of the fact that my MD, who became one of my greatest mentors, inspirations, woman leader, fabulous. She knew that I wasn't quite ready. And she actually sat
Mm.
me down on my first day and said to me, "You don't have to do this." And I said, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You don't have to do this. If you're not ready, you don't have to do this. We'll find something else for you to do in the business. It's okay." And I felt that I knew of all the people that interviewed, being somewhat maybe a bit cocky, I knew I was the best person out of the people interviewed to do the job. Was I the best person? Probably not. But in terms of the limited pool, I felt I was. So I was like, no, I'm fine. I can do it. And as I was saying, certain aspects went really well. Other aspects in terms of the operations, in terms of the finance side of the contract, in terms of the growth, in terms of the partnerships and all that type of thing. I struggled. I massively struggled. And I was afraid of asking for help because I was 27. I didn't want to look like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't want to reduce any confidence that people might have in me. And at the back of my head, I knew the MD had said this. So I thought if I admit at this point vulnerability, then maybe I'm going to prove her right. And I didn't know if that was her intention or not. But
Okay, we got to stop and get into the psychology of this right here, because this is like step number one of the stories that we tell ourselves in these situations. Good morning or hello, it's afternoon for you too, Mark, I think. Welcome to the show. Glad you're with us. So let's uncover the psychology behind this, right? What is it that makes us resist wanting other people to be right? Like you had this thing of like, if I admit this, then I'm proving her right, right? What is it that makes us shy away? Tell us ourselves the story that we're going to look bad or it's going to be problematic. Let's uncover a little bit of the psychology, because I think sometimes we need to understand that in order to know really what tools to embrace to overcome it.
yeah, and there's two main things in play in terms of psychology. First of all, that that belief, that incorrect belief that if people think we need help is going to undermine our capability. So it's an unhelpful mindset that doesn't serve us in any way. Because actually the truth of it is, and the science shows us, and actually the World Happiness Report came out today, so perfect
Yes,
timing.
it is World Happiness Day, everybody.
It is. So what we know is that whilst we might feel that asking for help makes us feel like people might see us as less competent and capable, actually, the truth is that people are much more inclined to help us than we're led to believe. So the data just come out today, 40% of people think that, or sorry, we think that if we ask for help, 40% of people are gonna not help us, and it's not true. It's much more like it's actually twice as likely that someone will help us than they won't help us, for starters, because people want to
Wow,
help.
but we tell ourselves this story, right?
Yeah, we
That
tell
is
ourselves that people don't want to.
that is two times over incorrect
Yeah,
according
yeah.
to the data,
Almost 2
right?
times, almost 2 times, yeah, exactly, and what's
Wow.
even more interesting with that is actually we completely underestimate the benefit to the person who is offers that help and then gives it. It's called the helper's high. People experience this sense of confidence and fulfillment and happiness, this serotonin boost, because they feel like they've been helpful, and that in itself is massive in terms of our mental health, in terms of our resilience on both sides. So it's this weird situation we're in where we feel like we can't ask for help. We feel that nobody wants to help us. Neither of those things are true. And if we did, the benefits, individually speaking, organizational speaking, performance speaking, are all positive.
And this is why, if you have young people in your world, like I do, you need to have them listen to this episode, because I know it's hard. You intake this information; it's hard to act on it. But if they would just give a little bit of trust to what Leanne just said, and recognize that it is okay. Burnout is so big around young people, I think, because they have this self-defeating narrative that prevents them from understanding that their relationships at work would actually be stronger if, instead of putting on their armor and thinking they have to prove their right to be there, they accepted that they are valued and have a right to be there, and that collaborating with their teammates, asking for help, working together is actually going to make it better for everyone.
And what was really interesting about the data that's come out today, Rita, is we are finding this effect amplified in our younger generations. So our younger people are even more likely to think that people don't want to help them, even more likely to think that asking for help is going to make them look less capable. So there's even an empathy gap at that level in terms of our young people. So as an older person in the workforce, as a manager in the workforce, it's even more important that, and it's as simple as, saying like, oh, do you know what really bugs me, Rita, is when people go, let me know if there's anything I can help you with. That's a really broad statement. That's again putting it on me to try and be vulnerable, and that's really difficult, and figure out a way that might be helpful. What's better is to be more specific.
Yes.
So you've been handed this project. Shall we sit down on Tuesday and talk through first steps? Yeah, that'd be great. Awesome. because at least it's something tangible. It's something that you've initiated with the intention of proactively and practically helping. That is demonstrating to me that this offer is genuine. This offer is going to be consistent, and we're in this together, and
Yes, yes.
that's really important.
I love that. Leslie said, could it be about our fear of judgment and criticism or not being smart enough? So I have to, I'm kind of in the, I'll show you thing, and I think that's a part of it as well. I do think that we tell ourselves stories that we have to prove that we have to prove. I mean, it's just that simple. We have to prove. And if we are not, we might get rejected in some way. And rejection is a really strong motivator, right? So what were you experiencing at that time? Do you remember thinking anything about rejection as a part of your motivation for your choices?
I think there was a fear there, definitely in terms of rejection, but I think it was a fear of the unknown. Well, what happens if I
Mm,
fail? Will I lose my job? How is that leaving it financially? There's a big ego side of it, especially when you get promoted internally. There's a big ego side of it
yes.
because your relationships have shifted. So it's taking that step backwards can feel mortifying. I think going back to the question though, I think there is absolutely an element of almost that, people talk a lot about imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon
Mm,
or phonyism. And that is a really common experience. And it's even more common to have thoughts and feelings like that if you are a high achiever and high performer.
yes.
And that
Yes.
itself is going to then, compound these fears that we have about, well, what happens if we don't succeed? Because that's a fundamental part of my identity as a high achiever the past 40 years. How does that then impact? So you're absolutely right to ask that question. Two things can simultaneously exist. That can be true, and it can be true that fundamentally it's better for our mental health to ask for help. It's better for our performance to ask for help. It's better for our trust in managers, trust in our team, our work relationships.
Yes.
Infinitely better if we feel able to ask for help. That doesn't mean it needs to be comfortable. That doesn't mean it removes the fear that people will think I'm less capable. But all the science shows us that actually people won't think that. People are more willing to help than you think they are. And the impacts of that in terms of everybody involved are huge.
One of the things that happens to us biologically when we get overwhelmed, right, is we get this flood, this release, this flood of endorphins and things in our system. And so sometimes I think people don't ask for help because they don't even know what to ask or where to start to ask for help. Were you clear about what help that you needed, or at that point in time, did you even know how to put into words what you needed to ask for?
There were elements that I knew from a practical and transactional sense that would be helpful. I knew if we went from going from an in the community model to a fixed premises model, that would be helpful. I knew that in terms of reducing my workload down, because I was asked to set up 2 contracts, to reduce me just focus on 1 would speed up my success there to then move on to the next one. So those practical task-based things involved that I knew would help, and I started to have some of these conversations. But because there were so many different challenges with the contract, it was difficult for my manager at the time, understandably, to separate what is just a real sticking point, snagging point in the startup and what
Mhm.
is coming because Leanne is not yet a capable, competent manager. And that took some unpicking. Um, and they couldn't unpick it to the point where it escalated, where I sat down with my MD, my director, and was told that I was getting demoted. I was not going to be a manager of anything anymore. And that was devastating.
I bet.
Absolutely
So what was the
devastating.
story? I'm sure that your internal critic would just stomping all over you. Like what stories were popping in your head when you got that when you came out of that conversation?
That conversation with the MD on day one, she was right. I wasn't ready. I wasn't good enough. I was wrong. I've let myself down. I've let my manager down. I've let my team down because at that point, then I'd recruited in about 10 people to work across the northwest of the UK. I'd let our customers down. I'd let everyone down. And my frustration was with myself, because it's one thing to feel that you failed, but as somebody who has tried to make a career of helping other people, to feel like you've let them down. And again, when we know the science of it, if we feel like we haven't helped, we failed other people, it's much more impactful than if we feel we failed ourselves. It was probably one of the top 5 worst days I've experienced in life, let alone
I can
in
believe
work.
that. I can believe that. And the other side, I mean, you're one personality. The other personality in this situation is the deflection personality. The personality that can't handle the idea that they have disappointed themselves. And so they start looking outside of themselves and they start blaming and they get caught in their victim story, right? Um and that, not that's even worse, think, and for many people, because when you start, at least you were inside of yourself and you were disappointed with you, but you were also, there was a level of ownership. But when we have that personality type, when we have especially people who've had a lot of trauma in their lives and they don't have the fortitude to face down that thing in themselves, and they start looking outside of themselves, that feeling of being trapped in that moment is even bigger. And I think we see that a lot right now in younger people, because um because we are in a mental health crisis in our young people's lives right now.
We are, and there's many factors that have contributed to that. The pandemic probably being one of the main ones. Economic uncertainty, the state of geopolitics, conflicts. There's a lot going on. Our young people are joining the workforce exhausted, burnt
Yes.
out because of the last 5 years they've experienced. I'm very careful not to advocate too much for positive thinking and reflection in a way that can be toxic, because I think there's a really fine line. That said, one thing that I was very conscious of during my first few years of my career was, what can I take from this situation, good or bad? What can I
Mm.
learn? Previous to that, I'd been in an organization that, from experience wise, was great. I didn't have a very good relationship with my manager. I didn't think they were a particularly great manager, but I remember thinking, I can learn. It's probably the psychologist in us, Rita, isn't it? When we're seeing behaviors that we don't understand and we don't think are effective, I slip into that. What can I learn from this situation? What can I take from it? And it was the same when that demotion happened. It was like, well, what can I learn from this? What can I take from this? How can I step forward? How do I look forward with hope, with optimism, with self efficacy where I can? I failed at this. That doesn't take away everything else that I've achieved up to this point. It doesn't take away everything I've achieved in terms of finding 10 great people to bring into the business. It's
So in
having.
that moment when you got the word, like, we're demoting you,
Mhm.
I'm sure you didn't immediately go to that learning. Like, how long do you think, and how do you think you were able to convert that from from a situation that had you sort of trapped in this negative self-talk into this place of growth mindset around it?
Honestly, it happened pretty quickly, because to give you a bit more context, I was given 3 options. I could go back to the role I was in previously. I could become, which was a coach on a contract, a different contract. I could become a coach on the contract that I'd been managing, or I could become a trainer on the contract I was managing. So I was given an immediate choice, and I had 24 hours to decide what I wanted to do.
Mm.
So I went back in the net. I spoke to Al, my husband. I spoke to some colleagues that I trusted, and 2 things happened in those conversations. First of all, I realized that the offer of help that I hadn't taken up on, my colleagues were then mortified, particularly my peers and more senior colleagues. They were kind of saying, I should have known, I should have been there, I could have helped, and giving me that reassurance that there's lots of variables in play. Let's focus on these. And in terms of speaking to Al, he was very much any great coach is, and Al is a phenomenal coach. What do you want? What have you enjoyed about this job? What have you found fulfilling? What are you going to miss about it? And it was the people, it was the customers, and it was doing something new, doing something that was stretching me. I wanted to be
Mm.
out of my comfort zone. I'd just gone a little bit too far. So I went back the next day. I was like, I want to be a trainer because I can't go back to the job I'm already in. There's no point getting more experience that I've already got just on a different contract. I'm going to be a trainer. And this wasn't the answer that my MD expected. She thought I was going to become a coach again. So from a performance perspective, that was very different. And I'd be going from being an employed member of staff to a freelance member of staff. And it was at that point that my director kind of stood up and was kind of like, I think you can do this. And I think if we remove some of these variables, we make it a bit smaller, some of the things that we've been talking about, we go to a fixed premises, we do this, I think you can do it. He campaigned for me, he advocated for me, and he got me a 3-month extension in my manager role in a reduced manager role to basically get it together. And it was at that point that, because I'd had these conversations with colleagues, been offered this help, seen the very sweetly, the disappointment from the team that I was leaving behind in one region, who didn't want me to leave because they were seeing that we were building something, we were seeing something was happening. I wasn't feeling it everything. And it's them being open-minded enough to hear these other cues, and we're very good as humans at picking up the negative stuff. It's just how our brain is programmed to work. If we can try and collect the data in a way that's like, well, these are the good things, these are negative, these were the downside, and try and look more objectively, which is really hard when you're in what is essentially a workplace trauma.
Right.
But talking,
well, I mean, you at that point that they reshifted your job, but you were sort of basically on a what we call a PIP, a performance improvement plan in the US, right? It's like, yeah, we'll try to help you save your job, but we're doing, but you got one mark against you.
Oh, yeah, I think I had more than one, but yeah, there were marks for sure.
And many people mentally can't get past that. Like once they are in that performance improvement zone and they have the internal story, I'm failing, like that, they just can't move beyond. I mean, I've spent years in HR working with people, and I was often like, let's just offer them 2 weeks severance and let them go, because we're torturing, like it was just like torturing people, and because they were torturing themselves. Did you have those doubts, and how did you handle that internal dialogue? So they say you can have this extension. How did you move beyond that, like constant drumbeat of, but can I really do this? Am I going to screw this? What happens if I screw this up again?
I'd already screwed it up, Rita. I'd already screwed it up. It was up or out. I'd already accepted that in terms of potentially stepping into a freelance trainer role. I knew I could get a job doing what I'd done previously. That wasn't in question, because that side of my job had never been in question. I'd performed well in that. That's how I got promoted, how I became one of those 82% of accidental managers who are moved into a manager role because they're good at the job they were now managing the people doing without any training, which is why I'm now also so passionate about training your managers, because in a certain way, I was set up to fail because I didn't have the hands-on experience. So I couldn't fail. So at that point, I'd already failed. The worst had already happened. At this point, I could those two outcomes, I either ask for help, I talk to my manager, I talk to my peers, I talk to my team, I get myself more organized, I put a plan in place to move forward, and together we just go for it and see what happens, or I leave it by Christmas. And it was already at that point where things were lost. What was extraordinary is I feel like I've experienced these statistics that we've just talked about in practice. I didn't feel able to ask for help because I thought people would think I was less capable. I was blown away when I did ask for help, the amount of people that were like, yeah, totally, let's do this. And when I asked for help, when we worked together, when my team saw what I went through and I came back and went, right, this is what's happened. I've been demoted. I'm now only focusing on this area. It's because I wasn't doing these three things particularly well, and I feel like I've let you down. I want to change that. I want to turn that around, and I'm going to need your help to do that. This is the help that I need. What help do you need? Creating that vulnerability, creating that psychological safety, which is fundamental in terms of asking for and offering help. And we know all the stats around psychological safety. Once we've got
there's something important that you said in that, and this is a critical piece I think so many people miss. You didn't just say, this is the help I need from you. You said part two, which is so important. And what help do you need from me? See, because that makes it now a partnership. That makes it a collaboration. So the balance of asking for help, and especially, I think this is so true today because I think so many people feel under resourced and overwhelmed. And so, what I see in my clients is that people feel guilty asking for help because they know how overworked everybody else already is. Or people feel tired of answering the call for help because they already feel like they have more on their plate. And all of that says to me that we don't see ourselves unified as a team. We're operating as individuals. But you made a call that was really about teaming.
Yeah, it was what was clear to me at that point, whether I listened to my negative voice or my positive voice, is that I was not enough alone to make this work. That was not enough. I needed support, I needed some training, I needed some mentoring, and I needed that collaboration and buy-in from my team. And I think it was at that point as well that I realized that I'm no longer the expert in terms of their job functionality. I used to be. I used to do that job. I'm not anymore. And industry moves on so quickly. There's always new things to learn. My only job at this point, and this is what my director told me just after this all happened and this shift happened, and we started on a much more mentoring type relationship. He said to me, your only job is to create an environment where other people can thrive. If you do that, the rest will figure itself out. If you can make sure that everyone's got what they need practically, emotionally, psychologically to succeed, to perform, then that's fundamentally your number one role as a manager. The rest will come. And it was having that forced conversation with my team, putting myself in that position of vulnerability, saying I need your help too, also then empowered them to be the expert in the areas that they're the expert in. Empower them to have ideas and make changes. And then fundamentally, because they've had that contribution to the changes being made, much more buy-in, those changes went through successfully. And it was unbelievable to me how quickly this turned around. Within a month, we were much more organized. We knew exactly where we were and what we needed to do. And that is fundamentally my advice to anyone who is in any role right now who is overwhelmed. Invest some time in figuring out exactly where you are in terms of your performance, in terms of your task load, in terms of what needs to be done. Because and this was a psychologist called John Amici who says this in his book, the most valuable thing you can give to somebody who is lost is to tell them exactly where they are.
Mm.
And that is a process we went through in that first month, is figuring out exactly where we are. So in month 2, we know exactly where we need to invest our time and energy, exactly where, we need to make changes to have the most impact. And by month 3, we were at the point where we were like, let's drive this even further. How do we grow this? How do we innovate this even more? And the 3 months came around and the contract was doing really well. My team was really happy. And my MD sat down and was like, fair dues. Will you stay on as manager? And I did. But that success, the rest of my success with that contract, and then actually I ended up getting promoted into the role above the role that I was demoted from. That never would have happened without that point of time of somebody going, this isn't good enough. You need help. Without me
I love that.
thinking,
Yes.
I'm not good enough alone. I need help. And it's as you say, it's that growth mindset that it's easier looking back, of course it is. But if we can pick up these little bits and pieces as we're going through an experience, and that can be done through journaling, through self-reflection, through conversations, then it's these things that are going to compound our sense of confidence, self-efficacy, identity, and also give us those moments, those key learning points that are fundamental in terms of our resilience. In that if things go wrong, if I have a setback, I can come back from this stronger. And knowing that and having done that and how you did it and why it worked, that fuels our resilience so much and so importantly. And what it fundamentally comes down to, and whether we look at any research, whether it be the World Happiness Report, whether it be anything around team building, leadership, health, mental illness, what we know is that fundamentally the best thing we can do for our psychological health, our mental health, our physical health, our happiness, our performance, our success rate, how long we live is the quality of the relationships that we have in our life. And work is such a big part of that. We have to prioritize building those relationships at work. And what we know about help, about psychological safety, is it's one of the most effective ways to build that trust and build that connection.
Yes, I mean, and Mark is sort of echoing that in his comment. You know, when you have good psychological safety, and I like the model of psychological safety that goes from just being um, being accepted within the team all the way up to being a challenger, being able to challenge the thinking in the room. But when you have that, it allows for people to be vulnerable with one another and to say to one another, look, it looks like you could use some help. Like that is such a gift. Oftentimes I think we see people in struggle and at work and we think we're going to embarrass them if we say something or offer some help. And I'm talking like at a peer level. And I will say the most valuable moments in my development of my career have always come from reaching out to a peer and saying, I am struggling with this, but you seem to navigate this effortlessly. Help me, teach me. What are you doing? How are you thinking about this? Those have been the moments of the most extreme growth from me. But that can only happen when you have real relationship with the people that you work with.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that I worry sometimes when we talk about these types of things, Rita, is people think, oh, does that mean I need to be best mates with all my coworkers? Does that mean I need to make this really, really soft type environment? No. Relationships at work are about civility.
Yes.
Relationships at work are about respect. They're about challenging ideas because, of course, they are. Some of my favorite people are the people that challenge me and my way of thinking. These relationships are about facilitating the mission delivery of the business, facilitating our own sense of meaning and purpose in terms of being aligned with this person in terms of values. And that doesn't mean that we fundamentally believe in the same things. It means that the core values that we have in this organizational context are aligned, that we're working together towards things. And I think the thing that I always come back to is all of this stuff isn't just good for us, it's really good for business. Even if you think it's all nonsense and it's all fluffy and whatever, it's really good for business. And the statistics are incredible. We know that organizations who promote this type of psychological safety, they experience about 26% more employee engagement. They experience about 40% higher customer satisfaction and about 30% lower turnover, which means your people are more engaged, they're less likely to leave, and your customers are happy. If we take those numbers really generally to the average size of a business in the UK, which is, say, $1 million in revenue per year, if we compare that to an organization that will invest in these things, invest in teamwork, invest in stability in the workplace, invest in psychological safety, and a big part of that is going to be training your managers. If you do that, you're more than likely going to save yourself around $250,000 a year in saved productivity and increased performance. This is
Huge, right?
fundamentally good for business.
Well, and in the World Happiness Report, I saw that presented at Wahasu last weekend, some of the data, and they've been charting companies that that are invested in well-being at work, not just the health benefits of well-being, but these ideas that we're talking about here about resourcing people and teamwork and meaning at work, all of those things that are really invested. and they are tracking them against the S&P 500, Nasdaq's numbers, all of that, and they are outperforming. I mean, they follow the same trend, but they outperform dollar for dollar at a remarkably higher level than the average company, a publicly traded company. And so there are economics behind this, and it's what makes it's us so passionate about why business leaders don't get it, right? Well, we just look around and go, but all the data is there. We could talk forever. We're going to have to wrap up this episode. Here's something very important. I hope everybody takes away from what you're sharing, Leanne, and that is that we tell ourselves a story that if somebody isn't offering us help, it's because we should know or we should be able to figure it out. Somebody wrote a book called Everything is Figure Outable. And there is some truth to that. Everything is, but that doesn't mean that is the only way or the best way. And so if you're in a position where you are taking inventory of where you are, like Leanne said, and you realize that you don't have all of the knowledge and experience that you need, don't fall into the trap of telling yourself the story that it is your job to figure that out all alone. Because as Leanne and I both work with companies where one of the number one things that we are promoting to them is you got to train your managers, your supervisors. You got to teach people how to do these things. When you are elevated to a new position and you're not given any training, you're being asked to do a job with one hand tied behind your back. And when that happens to you, what you're going to do is you're going to lean into what you already know, which means, like Leanne was saying, you're going to focus on the wrong part of your job. When your job, especially if you're managing people, is about creating the container that allows those people to operate optimally, you're going to fall back into what made you successful as an individual contributor. And all of those things come from these stories of telling ourselves that we are supposed to this. If this was not something I was supposed to figure out for myself, somebody would be helping me. But don't believe that, because so many companies are just failing right now to put their investments in the right places. And you can look at your peers, you can look at the people around you. There are lots of resources that you can go to start to build the skills that you need and get the knowledge that you need. But start by asking. Just start by asking. Those are my final thoughts. What are your final thoughts, Leanne, before we wrap this up?
I would just echo what you said, and with the view that now it's 2025 and information and content is much easier to access, much more than it was back when I was in this situation. Help can also come from external sources. If you don't have that psychological safety in your organization, we're talking very idealistically here. If people don't have that, there are other people that you can ask for help, whether that be people like you and I, Rita. I know that I
Yes.
leave a link in every show notes episode of our podcast where you can book in half an hour with me just to have a chat about something that's going on right now. You're always willing to help with what you're putting out on social media, the content that we create, other people out there, the number of people who would be thrilled to hear from you. Just, a message on LinkedIn going, I've seen what you've been talking about in leadership. I'd love to learn more about how you approach line management. Would you be willing to give me 60 minutes just to have a virtual coffee and chat it through? I promise you 9 out of 10 people are going to say yes.
I agree. And hello at truthliesand spelled out work.com. That's how you can reach out to Leanne. She means this. And I do as well. I get a lot of requests like that. And I'm always happy because look, the thing about psychologists like Leanne and I that do this for a living is we want to see the world filled with the best possible workplaces, and we will give a lot of things away for free to help companies and help individuals get there. I also want to remind you, this is the link to Truth Lies and Work, Leanne's podcast. So if you're not listening and following, I'm telling you, there's so much good advice, and you can do right into her show, and she'll she'll read your question and give an answer on her show. Is it, that's the Thursday episode, right? That you guys do that?
That's Tuesdays. Yeah, Tuesdays has
Tuesday.
our
I
workplace
knew I was going to get
surgery.
that wrong. Is it Tuesdays? Every Tuesday, she has like an open advice column to workers everywhere. So you're going to want to join her for that. So thank you for being with us today. Thank you for hanging in there for this time in this conversation. And please share this with somebody you know, especially a young person, young leaders in your organization, in your family, in your friends group. Hopefully, they will find some comfort in Leanne's story, but also some inspiration in Leanne's story. Leanne, thank you for sharing your story with us today, because you are giving a model, you're giving a roadmap for so many people. I think that is so very important. Next week, I am on vacation, which means I won't be coming live for the story I'm telling myself. I may drop some early episodes. If you're just finding us new, you want to get caught up. But we will be back then the very first week. I think actually March 31st is our first episode back. So I'll be dropping information about that, even though I'm on vacation next week. So everyone, have a terrific Thursday. It's the end of the week. We're almost done. Leanne, you've been a delight. Thanks for joining us today. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.